Okay, here we are wrapping up scope management with the discussion of the control processes. Before we get to that, think of what we've just accomplished. Plan scope management, then we collected requirements, we defined the scope, which gave us a scope statement, and then we created the work breakdown structure, giving us the WBS and what always goes with it? The WBS dictionary. Now I've got a scope statement, WBS and WBS dictionary. That gives me my scope baseline. One of three very important baselines that I am always working to integrate and manage the estimates that they are based off of. And our success as a project manager will largely be based on the ability to accomplish the baselines. In this case, the scope baseline is now set. Well, we do that by controlling. And if you look at page 25 and look under the control process group, monitor and control, and then find the scope management knowledge area, you'll see that there are two processes used to control in scope management. There's validate scope and, of course, the standard control scope. In validate scope, the project manager's is important here because in the project plan, because it provides, among other things, the scope baseline that we just built, including, of course, I said, the scope statement, WBS dictionary, and WBS. And the validate scope is all about reviewing the deliverables with the customer to gain this formal acceptance. You want it written too, formal acceptance. And if they don't completely accept it, it can lead to change requests. So in validate scope, we're looking at the work and all of the work and only the work. And all of that has been included in the scope statement and the work breakdown structure. We're going to validate it periodically, so at the end of each phase in my life cycle, before I start a new IPEC for a new phase, I would validate the scope with the customer. Okay? In that case, I would call it formal acceptance of interim deliverables, as opposed to the end of the project when I call it formal acceptance of final deliverables. It's just a slight nuance, slight difference there. Okay, so I'm going to grab my project plan, and I'm going to grab my sponsor, and I'm going to grab me, and I'm going to go grab my quality metrics that prove I've built what they want, and I'm going to go validate that scope with the customer. Okay, so it has the verified deliverable. So control quality is an important part of this. I'm going to do control quality, which is QC, quality control. Then I'm going to validate. Control quality and validation can be done at the same time if they're huge. Imagine if I just refurbed an entire airplane. Would I want to spend 3 weeks doing quality control and then call the customer and spend another 2 weeks going over validate scope with them when I could do them at the same time? I could grab the customer and say, we're finished with the project, we're about to do quality control quality, and we would like to validate the scope with you while we do it. You could do it at the same time. You would always do quality control before validate scope or during validate scope. You would never validate scope with the customer before doing quality control. That's the point I'm trying to make there. Okay? So it has its inputs, tools, and outputs. With the project plan, of course, we're in validate scope. So it makes sense my scope management plan, my requirements, and my scope baseline are included. Project documents regularly include lessons learned, quality reports, because remember, I'm validating scope. I just took my results from quality control and I'm going to use them here to show the customer the requirements are met, and hence the requirements traceability matrix. As an input, I'm going to bring my validated deliverable. When the PMBOK guide says validated deliverable, it means my quality control proven deliverable, which meets the requirements as we need them including quality requirements. The term used in the PMBOK guide is correctness, that the deliverable is built correctly as we've defined and agreed. And I'm also, as an input, now I need work performance data. Remember, I defined this in the first week, and this is where I collect raw data during the execution process group. My tools and outputs then to continue. Inspection becomes a key tool. In inspection, we do this all the time when I review my checkbook each week to make sure what I've spent has cleared. We're doing inspection. That's where we measure, examine, or verify are the key aspects to inspection. You might do it in a walkthrough, like the airplane inspection that I just mentioned. You might do it at the same time as quality control. And then we would use decision making, which largely involves voting, used to reach a conclusion when the validation is performed by the project team or other stakeholders. And then I will have as my outputs either my accepted deliverable signed by the customer that it meets the acceptance criteria, or they can do change request if there's some sort of defect and we need to repair it. So the types of those could be preventive actions or corrective actions or defect repair itself, as I defined in earlier lessons and are defined in the PMBOK guide and also in Rita's book. I also have an output is work performance information. So I had data as an input, raw data, and now I've analyzed it, and that's information as an output. And that can be used to go to change control next if there are change requests, and then document updates. Okay. Here's a quick quiz, validate scope quiz. Where does validate scope fall within these three processes? Closing process group, within the closing process group, within validate scope process, or quality control process? Well, as I just mentioned, you would always do quality control first, and that's listed in 8.3 of the PMBOK guide. Then, and that's correctness. I'm looking for engineering specifications, engineering measurements. So a tool there, of course, would be inspections. Am I meeting specs, as the military likes to say? Then I'm going to go to validate scope, and that's with the customer, the key is. And I'm getting formal acceptance, either of the final deliverable at closing the project, or interim acceptance, formal acceptance of interim deliverables when I'm closing the phase. And I can do 8.3 and 5.5 at the same time, but I would never do 5.5 first. And after that, I'm going to go close the phase or the project. Okay. So the answer to number one really is B or C. It's both, a B or C. And number two, you will do validate scope even when the project terminates or cancels. This is true. You will always do validate scope. Document and report what you've achieved as lessons learned before you close out, so that if the project is picked up again or something similar, they understand what you've achieved. Okay. The other controlling process in scope management is control scope. In control scope, here we ensure that change requirements are processed through integrated change control, including preventive and corrective actions. This is about making sure that they're going through ICC. And this analysis will happen here in ICC, and as it ties to it. We want to determine the cause of the issues and the degree of variance, and that we should take corrective or preventive actions. It's going to drive us to that conclusion, okay, in control scope. So again, we're monitoring the status of the project. Are we keeping up with the scope baseline? And trying to maintain that baseline throughout the project. Controlling the project scope means that all requested changes and corrective and preventive actions are processed through ICC. And this is what control scope is going to do for us. It's a very common control process. It has its typical inputs, tools, and outputs, which are well recorded in the PMBOK guide, and I ask you to review that in detail on pages 169 to 171. And that concludes largely scope management for this week. Thank you very much. I look to see you in the discussion board and by email. Some of you have even given me a call. We've talked. Let me know. I'm happy to discuss and encourage continued learning and success in